All right, so we're live on Facebook. We're recording here as well, and I'll get you that recording sometime tomorrow when it's ready. I'll start admitting people here and we'll get going. All right, and welcome everybody to a Free Thinkers Corner, Books and More. Our next in our May is for Mystery author series. We're live on Zoom. We're live on Facebook. One thing I ask is that everybody keep their video and their mics muted and off, please, just so it keeps down confusion. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to use the chat down on the bottom. Everybody on Facebook Live, same thing there. Just use the comment section and I will relay any comments or questions to our guest. Our guest tonight is Carol Orange. She's worked in the art world for over 20 years. She became a research editor on art books in London. She became an art dealer in Boston. And her first book is called A Discerning Eye. Carol, welcome. Thank you for being a part
Thank
of
you.
our program.
Thank you so much, Chris, for having me. Yes.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So let's start with you worked as an art dealer, or you're in the art world. What did you do in the art world? I mentioned a few things, but what kind of art? What did you do? Where did you work?
Okay, so I had a gallery in Boston, in the Fort Point Channel area that was near the Children's Museum. And I specialized in emerging artists, artists who had not yet made it to the museum world, but had a lot of potential. And of course, living in Boston near the museum school, living near RISD in Providence, there are a lot of talented artists in the Boston area. So one of the artists that I represented was named Sterling Mulberry. I do mention her in the book. And she shows at the Clark Gallery in Boston. Her art is realistic, but it has a kind of mood to it. And I also represented an artist named Anne Thornycroft, who happens to live in Santa Monica, California, and she's a color field artist. So, I really loved doing this, and I exhibited their work all around the United States at various art shows. I also exhibited in Paris at the Grand Palais. And, I loved representing artists and showing their work. I ran into some problems in the late 80s when there was a financial crisis, and I decided to give it up because I didn't want to be a bill collector. That was the downside of owning a gallery. It's a tough business. I had gone into it very idealistically.
We tried to start up an art gallery at the store. We rented the space next to us, and unfortunately, the pandemic happened. And so, just as we were starting to get that going, we've had to close it down, and it's been closed since. But yeah, it is. It seems to be a lot of work, just trying to get artists to come in and to be, to have a show. So, I mean, definitely not on your scale, but it was definitely trying to put a call out to artists and try to get a theme and get everything together. But unfortunately, like I said, we could get it to happen. So you began as a research editor on art books in London. What is a research editor for art books, and what's it like working in London?
Oh, well, this was a pretty long time ago. It was really a dream job. My husband was an academic, and that's why we were in London. He was doing some research for a book that he wrote about why the working class Brits supported the Tory party. And so while we were living there, I had majored in art history and English. And I was so lucky, I got a job as a research editor for a small publisher in London. And they were doing a series of books on different kinds of art. So my book was Spanish art, which I knew almost nothing about. And my advisor worked at the Spanish embassy, and his name was Xavier de Salas, and he was, a very bright, extraordinary guy who also had a wonderful sense of humor, and he taught me a lot about Spanish art. So as a research editor, I would go, this was my job. I couldn't believe I was being paid to do this. I would go to the British Museum and I would research and look for drawings by Goya or Velázquez or El Greco. Those are like the most famous artists, but also a lot of other artists. I would look for drawings and other types of art that these painters did for the book. And I also, wrote a section for the book on Spanish art, that the influence of Spanish art in South America, largely, I would say, in architecture. So yeah, it was a dream job. I mean, imagine being paid to sit
Yeah.
in the British Museum and then meet with this very courtly gentleman who later became the director of the Prado Museum in Spain. Yeah. So yeah,
Did
that's
you
what
meet
I
any
did.
famous?
Hmm?
Nice. Did you meet any famous artists? Did you meet any famous artists while you were there?
No, I did not meet famous artists because most of the artists that we were writing about, I mean, my colleagues, like one person did a book on Dutch and Flemish art. Most of them were no longer alive. However, I did meet a really fascinating person who is a wine expert who's written all kinds of books on wine. He was boyfriend of one of my colleagues, and his name was Hugh Johnson. I don't know if you've ever seen any of, because I don't know if they've come across the pond, so to speak, but he was a wine expert. And he also taught me how to bake salmon, fresh salmon that's been caught in the river, how to bake it in an oven so that it's just very flaky and delicious and all the juices are there. You wrap it up in wax paper. That's what I learned. So I think he was about the most famous person that I met while I was living in London. Although one of my dearest friends, who I'm still friendly with from that time, lived across the street from me in New York. His name is Humphrey Taylor. And he was the CEO of the Lou Harris opinion polls in the Lou Harris brought him over here, and he helped my husband devise a questionnaire for his book. So, but I didn't meet any famous artists, alas.
So what was the best food that you had in London?
Oh, okay. I think the best food, and I had never had it before, was Dover sole. I mean, at the time I lived there, England had pretty bad food for the most part. I mean, fish and chips was sort of your daily fare, but Dover sole was a delicacy. And then the other food that I grew to love that I had never had was um, Indian food, because in addition to being paid, a weekly sum for working at the publishing company, we were also given luncheon vouchers. And so there is incredible Indian food in London. And I've never been able to find the equivalent of the quality of Indian food in the US. I don't know why, because there certainly are plenty of plenty of Indians who live in our country, but in London, well, I guess because it was a former British colony, it was really great, really delicious.
We have a great one here. It's called A Taste of India, and they've been here for a long time, and it is very, very good. When they say hot, they mean hot too, by the way.
What is your favorite dish?
Oh my goodness, tikka masala. They make a great chai tea as well. It's nice. We've been there, and they go and they'll serve it. They make this one thing where it's I don't remember what they call it, but it's naan bread, but it's sliced in half, and it has a thin layer of mashed potatoes and then peas and then some curry and spices on it, and then it's wrapped and it's kind of steamed, so it's really soft, and it's great for dunking in the sauce, and this is wonderful.
Making me hungry.
I know. Me
Just,
too.
just thinking about it. Yeah.
Me too. So
Yeah.
you mentioned that you worked in Paris as well. You organized or founded the Sand Chopin Salon.
Correct.
What is that?
Okay, so lucky me, I got to live in London when I was very young, and I have to say it really changed my life, because I really didn't know that much firsthand about the rest of the world. And, London is an international city, so I did meet people from all over the world there for the very first time. So I lived in Paris from 1990 to 92. It was in a way a self-imposed sabbatical. And I was lucky because I had met through the art world this wonderful Parisian woman who became a really close friend of mine. She was publishing fine art, photography, posters, and also note cards. And so she was like one of the main reasons I went to live in Paris. And the other was that I wanted to spend my time really writing, and I was working on a group of short stories, but I got involved with the Romantic era in Paris because I lived on a street that was called Rue Daniel Stern. And I said to my friend Martine, who was he? Was he a hero in World War II? And she said, no, Daniel Stern is a she. She's really Marie Dagout. And I went, really? Yes, she said, oh my goodness. In the 19th century, women in Paris, women writers, had to write under male pseudonyms. So I became really fascinated with this and used my old researching skills and went to the library and went to the area of Paris that the Romantics lived in. It's called the 9th arrondissement, and it doesn't get as much traffic as touristic traffic as lots of other parts of Paris, but there's a beautiful little museum there called La Musée de la Vie Romantique. And Georges Sand is discussed there, as well as Marie Dagout, who was the lover of Franz Liszt. So Georges Sand was the lover of Chopin. And the two women writing under male pseudonyms, Marie Dagout was a historian, and Georges Sand wrote, gosh, sort of overwhelming 100 books in her lifetime. So these women ran salons in Paris, and they at that time Paris was the cultural center of the universe. So there was the painter Delacroix, who was a good friend of both of these women. There were philosophers. There were, these wonderful musicians, composers. Berlioz, the one who wrote Carmen, was part of the salons. And then there was also Balzac and Victor Hugo. And I mean, it just goes on and on. So when I came back to Boston, my neighbor who lived across the street is a concert pianist. Her name is Virginia Eskin. Actually, she now lives in New Hampshire, in Keene, New Hampshire. But she was a concert pianist, and she's, I came back to Boston and I couldn't stop talking about Georges Sand and Chopin. She said, oh, let's do something together. And so we did these salons at the French Library in Boston, where Virginia played Chopin and I read excerpts from Georges Sand, and we had another person who sang. And it was just so much fun. We were trying to replicate the salons in Paris at the French Library in Boston.
So now, for those who don't know, or may not know, a salon, it's not a place where you go get your hair done or shave or a facial or stuff like that. It's a place where people get together and discuss and philosophize and talk about art and different things. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
I actually learned that from The Big Bang Theory on TV.
Well, evidently, when Franz Liszt used to play at the salons, he had this charisma, and women would faint and sort of throw themselves at him. But he was, I suppose, for a 19th century, he was kind of had the same adoration that the Beatles had when they first came to America. It was really funny.
Yeah, I'd be interested to go back to that time for those type of events, performances. I love Liszt, I love Chopin, but to be part of that, you see it in movies and TV and stuff, but how much of that is sort of romanticized, today compared to what it was really like back then. But if I had a time machine, I would definitely love to go back and to be able to sit in on some of those things. Victor Hugo, he is, you mentioned him, he's one of my all-time favorite writers. I love the way he writes. Les Miserables, of course, is one of his most famous. I love it every time it's on TV, either the movie or my wife and I have seen it on stage.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. We've seen it a couple times in Boston. We saw it out in California quite a few times. Just love it. But I would love to go, if I could ever get to Paris, I would love to go bring the book with me and see if I can find all the different places. Did you ever do the tourist thing when you
Oh
were in
yeah, oh,
Paris?
all the time. I mean, all the time. I went to Balzac's house in Paris. I went to, I would do all of the things that they did in the 19th century. I went to Georges Sand's house, which is a chateau, and it's in the Loire Valley. And it is so gorgeous. And there's a dining room table with places, and there's Delacroix's place, there's Chopin's place, and her son would make marionettes and put on little plays at his mother's house. And so there's a little marionette theater. But yeah, I loved doing, I mean, it's hard. I lived there for two years, but I loved playing tourist every
Hmm.
day. It
So of
was
course,
really so much fun. And I don't know, the first time I saw Les Miserables, I just cried. I
yep,
just couldn't stop
me
crying.
too.
Yeah, it was, Jean, what's his name? Jean
Jean
Valjean.
Valjean.
Oh, oh my God. Just heartbreaking, really
Hmm.
heartbreaking.
So did you
So,
ever go to the? You must have gone to the Louvre then.
oh yes, I went a lot, and in my novel, I do have two of the people who are characters in my novel. They go to Paris on their honeymoon. They're from Medellin, Colombia, and they love art. And so they go to Paris on their honeymoon, and they go to the Louvre, and they sit and look at, Delacroix's iconic painting, Liberté, and, they're just astounded by it. So, I mean, the thing about the Louvre is so enormous, and you can get so easily overwhelmed. So when I would go, I would spend like an hour or so, maybe a little more than an hour, and I would just sit in one room and study the paintings in that room. And then another day I would go back to, I mean, there are just so many rooms and so many gorgeous works of art that you can get easily overwhelmed.
Yeah,
But
that's. Go ahead.
in true French fashion, they have fabulous restaurants inside the Louvre. So, if you get a little, so if your eyes start to glaze, as they do after a while, when you're looking at just too much art, you can go get a wonderful lunch with a glass of wine.
Yeah, I would love to go to the Louvre. I love right now. I'd love to go anywhere. Um, but um, in the movie The Da Vinci Code that Dan Brown wrote, a
Yes,
big portion of it takes place in the Louvre, and all the
right.
symbolism in certain pieces. I would love to go take that book with me and see if I can find the symbology that's in a lot of those works that he mentions in the book. So what was your favorite part of the Louvre? What was, and in general, what type of art is your favorite type of medium?
Well, I would have to say personally, um, I love portraiture. I mean, I love to be able to look at a portrait, say that Rembrandt did, because he knew people in such a deep way, and you could see it in the faces. It wasn't just a face, it was a character. He put so much character into faces. So I do love portraiture. I mean, I think, Velasquez was also, and Goya, the two greatest Spanish artists, they were also able to create character the way Rembrandt did, even though they had different styles, but the faces tell a whole story. And so I do love portraiture, but the magnificent, large canvases that Delacroix did, I would have to say that my favorite. I mean, he was depicting the French Revolution in Liberté, and there are dead bodies at the bottom of the painting, and there's this bare-breasted woman who's waving the French flag, and and there are people with rifles. There's so much drama going on in this epic painting, and it so it tells a whole story. So I really must say that paintings like that really capture my imagination, and I feel immersed inside them. I don't think that, yeah, I mean, I guess the equivalent that we have is the painting of Washington crossing the Delaware.
Okay.
That's an iconic kind of painting. It's historical and there's drama. And I do really love paintings that tell a story.
What do you think about the ones, the sort of modern art, I guess, where people grab big things of paint, cans of paint, and just throw them at the thing, and then put them up on a wall in an art gallery and sell them for $350,000?
Well, I mean, there has to be a method to their madness. I mean, I don't love, Jackson Pollock the way I love Delacroix. But I can appreciate that once everything has been done, where do you go from there? And you have to break out of the confines of realism. So, I think someone who really transcends this is Mark Rasco. And actually, I saw a great play on Broadway about Mark Rasco, because his paintings are really abstract. They are abstract, but they're very moody. I mean, you can feel the way the canvas is dripping down, and his playing around with colors and mood. And, so I don't get as emotionally involved, I have to be honest, in a Mark Roscoe as I get with Velasquez, Las Meninas, for example, or Delacroix's Liberté, or even, John Singer Sargent. But I recognize that there is some talent involved in abstract painting, because they called it abstract expressionism. And I do think this is how some artists express themselves. And most of these painters were schooled in traditional art. They painted figures, they painted scenery, but they were expressing themselves with, abstract configurations and playing around with not just paint, but other kinds of materials. So I can appreciate the talent, but they don't move me the same way.
Mhm. Now, I had read an article a couple months or so ago where I had to cringe, but I also had to laugh, where there was, I wanted to say it was over in Japan or Korea or something, or maybe it was here, but the art, it was a big huge wall, and it was like a graffiti, but the artist had left paint cans and brushes on a drop cloth, and that was part of the exhibit. But somebody who was there looking at it thought that it was left there for people to dip the brush in and just start going. And so I cringed, because I could see that it was part of it, but I had to laugh too, that you know But yeah, so different things for different people, I guess. But so as a bookseller, we have a lot of our authors come in and want me to read their books, local authors and stuff. And of course, some I have to turn away because they're just not ready. Um, I think there's some books that just don't resonate with me, but they're good books, so we'll have them in the store anyways. When you were an art dealer in Boston, did you have to go through that as far as people coming to you with their art, or when you went out to look for certain things? Really, it's not your cup of tea, but it is to make it a rounded exhibit to have different pieces.
Yeah, well, I think because I went to lots of art fairs, um, I mean, people dropping into a gallery is a very different experience than being in an art fair, because at an art fair, there are so many more people. And, there's also like a ton more competition. Will the people stop by your booth? Will they look at your artists on the wall? So, you know, but it felt like I was part of a community being in an art fair. And you know, I, I would take a break and I would look around at the other booths myself, because I always love to see all kinds of art. And so, sometimes at the art fairs, there were, well, no, often there were booths of artists from other countries. And I started representing some Italian artists who I really liked, because their sensibility, their sense of humor actually appealed to me, um, or their mythological characters. There's one artist that I'm still very friendly with who lives in a little town in Italy, and he paints these mythological figures, and yet they're both modern and they're old at the same time. And so his work really, really appealed to me. And, I asked him if I could represent him in the US. And he said yes. But I mean, I have to say that I did have limited success with his work, because he really does have an Italian sensibility.
Mhm.
And, I think it's harder to find art appreciators like that.
Do you find that there's a common, maybe not so much anymore in modern times compared to as like Renaissance times or before, but there's definitely differences between European art, Asian art, um,
Yeah.
Middle Eastern art. Um, do you find any, I don't want to say cross pollination, but cross uh, talent from different ones? From, so like an Asian artist, have you ever worked with one of them that has more of a European style, and vice versa?
Yeah, I did once represent an artist who actually, I still have some of her work. She was American, but she lived in Kyoto, and she did these hand painted fans that I just thought were so exquisite. I mean, she learned to paint fans in Kyoto. I think she spent a couple of years there. And, I just thought they were very original, because she was an abstract painter, but she used the traditional Japanese fan um, as her canvas. And I do still, as I said, I actually sold her work quite well, because there was something really breathtaking and fresh about it. So I'm trying to think. I don't think I ever worked with an Asian artist, although I do appreciate, I think, especially Japanese art, the simplicity of it, is just, it it's very restful and it's very peaceful. And
Zen.
if you contrast that with Delacroix' Liberté, which is anything but peaceful, I can really enjoy the kind of, I think the whole Japanese aesthetic is so appealing. I have a little bit of a hard time following it myself, but I like the idea of it.
So of course, all this art talk is leading us up to your big novel, A Discerning Eye, which has to deal with art and of course the mystery aspect of it is it's an art heist. So in writing this book or coming up with the idea for this book, obviously there must be a lot of your background
Mhm.
in this novel. How about you tell us about the book, about the plot? No spoilers, of course, but
Okay, okay, yes. So my protagonist in A Discerning Eye is an Italian-American woman. She's 38 years old, and she loves art. Um, Given her Italian background, of course, she was very drawn to the Italian Renaissance art, but she has a contemporary gallery in Boston, and she's a docent at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And her younger brother is a painter, and he teaches at the museum school. And they would go together to the Gardner, which was their favorite place in Boston. And they would sit in front of Vermeer's painting, The Concert, and they would contemplate it. They would look at it. They would talk about it. They would dissect it. What is Vermeer saying in this painting? Why is the lute player sitting there with his back to the audience, as it were, and the two women on either side of him, you can see their faces, but you can't see the face of the lute player. So her brother Antonio says, why did he do that? And they would get deeply into it and discuss it. And he had his theory, she had hers, and so that was his favorite painting in the world. And his ambition was to paint like Vermeer, because you really brought inside this room where one woman is playing on a harpsichord and the other woman is keeping time or singing. And then there's the back of the lute player. So Portia goes through a very difficult time in her life. First, her father dies, and she really looks up to her dad. He was a lawyer, and he did a lot of pro bono work, and she really respected him. So he dies, and both she and Antonio are in mourning about their father. And then Antonio is having a lot of difficulty with his love life, but he's also in mourning about his father. And he commits suicide, and she is totally devastated by this. And she's married and has a daughter. And but she tries to go about her life, gets immersed in her gallery and supporting her artists. But when the robbery happens at the Gardner Museum, and one of the 13 art objects is Vermeer's The Concert, she is completely devastated. It's like, it's like they stole not just the art, but they stole all of her experiences with her brother. And, she is so upset about this. She feels she needs to really get some distance by analyzing what's going on, because the police are not coming up with any clues. They don't really know, why did they steal these particular pieces? They don't have any clues about, where the paintings might be. So Portia analyzes all of the paintings that have been stolen, in depth, and she comes up with this overarching theme that all of the paintings and drawings, the Degas drawings that were stolen, they all have this overarching theme of a tension between dark and light. And so she documents this and said, it had to be someone who was drawn to these particular paintings because they went out of their way to take the Manet's Chez Tortoni, which is a portrait of a man dressed in a top hat and tails, sitting at a cafe with a half-drunk glass of wine, and half his face is in shadow. And that Manet was in a room with like 150 other pieces. It was one of the rooms that was just overfull of art. Whereas, in the Dutch room, there are maybe 30 paintings. So why did they go to the Dutch room and steal the Rembrandts and steal the Vermeer when there was a gorgeous Zurbarán? He's another wonderful Spanish painter, by the way, that I learned about. And, the Dutch paintings are valuable, but really the heart of Isabella Stewart Gardner's collection is the Italian Renaissance. And they could have just run up one more flight to take, Titian's Rape of Europa, which is probably one of the most valuable paintings there, or the Little Giotto, which Duveen called the most valuable piece in the Gardners. So they weren't taking the most valuable art, they were taking art for a specific reason, and the police weren't at all interested, or the FBI, in what art was stolen. They did focus, as if you saw the docuseries that's just come out on Netflix called This Is a Robbery, the one painting that they seemed to focus on was the only Rembrandt seascape of Christ in the Sea of Galilee. But they didn't discuss any of the other art really at all. So Portia puts this all together, and she puts it together, and through someone that she meets, she's introduced to the head of the art crime unit at the FBI. And he reads through this and he said, I've got to meet this woman. And so they meet in New York, and he's really, impressed with her analysis. And the FBI does a search in their database, because she's come up with this psychological profile of the thief. And they find that the one that matches is someone in Medellin, Colombia, who has come to their attention through the cocaine trade, but also happens to be a lover of art. So anyway, the FBI hires her to work with them. You know, they also discover that she's fluent in Spanish and that she does have some contacts in Medellin. So I don't want to give away the end of the story, but the story does go, she does go with the FBI, and then they meet with Interpol in Medellin.
I was going to mention that. So you have Interpol, you have the FBI, the mafia, drug lords, but you have this daring female art dealer. Well, let me start by asking this. Is this based on a true story, or is it completely fiction?
It's fiction. I mean, the true part is that the real art was stolen. And sad to say that 31 years after this theft, you know, they still haven't found it. So that's the true part, but everything else is fiction. You know, Portia Malatesta is fiction. You know, the going to Medellin, Colombia is fiction. It's all fiction. But I did, you know, I am a good researcher. I did a lot of research, you know, about the FBI. I did a lot of research about the cocaine trade in Colombia because this happened in 1990, and that's when the drug war in Colombia was really hot, and Pablo Escobar was, you know, the drug king, and he was in Medellin. And I did base one of the characters on Pablo Escobar because he was in Colombia, he was considered the Robin Hood type of criminal. You know, he ran the cocaine trade and he was fierce. He was, you know, he wouldn't hesitate to have people killed. At the same time, he built a football stadium, hospital for, you know, the ordinary people in Colombia. And he also, you know, would provide food at festivals. He would do all kinds of things for people who lived in the barrios of Medellin. And so he was considered a hero in the barrios, but he was hated and feared. And he really, you know, he really had this beautiful country, you know, just down on its knees during this period. So it just so happens another reality is that the Boston police and the FBI were very involved with the Boston mafia, who were involved in the cocaine trade. So I do, you know, because I did all this research, I do include that in my book.
Okay. So I've read some books where the main characters or some of the characters' names are significant. Is there any significance to the name you chose for your protagonist, Portia, or is it you just like the name, or because well, for an example, Aldous Huxley, and in his Brave New World, there is a well, it's about 20 years old now, a movie called Demolition Man, where one of the main characters is called Lenina Huxley. Well, when you watch the movie, it's very dystopian, very you know, Brave New World type. And so for whatever reason, well, we have the book in the store. Maybe I was doing something with it. I read this and I said, wait a minute, Lenina and Huxley. And so I kind of Googled it, researched, and sure enough, Lenina was the main character in A Brave New World, and of course it's Aldous Huxley. So they put that together, and so it made for that character for that movie. Does Portia have any
Yes,
symbology or?
yes, Yes, well, Portia and her brother Antonio are right out of Shakespeare, The Merchant of Venice. And I mean, Antonio was not Portia's brother in The Merchant of Venice, but Portia is one of the more really interesting female characters that Shakespeare created. So that's why I named her Portia. I mean, Portia is very concerned about justice and fairness, and she has very strong moral compass. And, so that's her mother. I mean, I gave her the name Portia, but her mother named her Portia because of the character in The Merchant of Venice. And Malatesta is her last name. And actually, I see that some of my high school friends are here, which is wonderful. But I believe there was someone in our high school whose last name was Malatesta. And I remember him telling me, and this was quite a while ago, about how his family made wine in their basement and that they would stomp on the grapes. And I was always just delighted at that imagery. And, I just think Malatesta's a great Italian name. And so that's why I came up with Portia Malatesta, because she had to be Italian because of The Merchant in Venice, and then I created that name.
Nice. So when did you set it in? You said it's set in Boston. Why Boston? Why not like a European museum or Paris or even London?
Oh, you mean why why did I set this book in
Hmm.
Boston? Because the real event happened there, and I based it on a real event, an unsolved mystery. It's still unsolved. So it's something that people, think about. It's like, how could they get away with this? How could these, whoever did it, how could they get away with it? Um, you know, I I do have Paris because I couldn't resist. And since I live there, I do have it in the novel, just, one scene. Um, but, you know, they there are art thefts all over the world for sure. And but this robbery is actually, it's the biggest, unfortunately, art robbery that's ever happened anywhere. So, being a former Bostonian and a former Boston art dealer, I thought, and also I love Isabella Stewart Gardner. I thought she was an extraordinary woman. And one of my scenes in the book, Portia and Isabella, even though Isabella obviously is dead, so you have to suspend, it's fiction, you have to suspend disbelief. They have conversations, and you know, Isabella is one of her idols, and part of why she feels responsible that she's got to get this art back. One is for her brother Antonio, and the other is for Isabella, her idol. And Isabella, if she were alive today, would be horrified that this had happened in her museum, which is a Venetian palazzo. So, it all ties together. The Merchant of Venice, a Venetian palazzo, an Italian art dealer, Isabella, this extraordinary patron of the arts, who put together this magnificent collection. And then some excuse me, selfish bastard has the nerve to orchestrate this robbery and prevent the public from seeing these wonderful works of art. So
Do you think the real heist was just one person, or was it multiple people?
I think there was a mastermind because of the specific art that was stolen. You know, it seemed to me that they had a shopping list. You know, most art thefts are very, you know, they just take what's nearest to the door and they run with it. But this seemed, you know, they were in there for 81 minutes, and it seems that they were following the shopping list. So there definitely were two thieves who posed as policemen who got into the museum, and then, you know, they could have taken anything, but it was crazy. They took, you know, Degas drawings when right next to it was a Michelangelo drawing. So, you know, they were, I believe there was a mastermind. In the docuseries, which is very good, it's really good, and it focuses on a lot of the mobsters in the greater Boston area. You know, the FBI really seemed to have focused on one theory, which was that the mobsters were looking for a get out of jail card, which Miles Connor, one of the mobsters, actually had done this very thing at the Museum of Fine Arts. So it only happened once, and it happened with one Rembrandt. So why did they steal 13 works of art? If you want to get out of jail card, you know, this is why I think there was a mastermind.
It always amazes me, or boggles the mind, where you have these art thieves who steal even higher profile, like Rembrandts and Monets and things like that. What do you think you're going to do with them? Because other than, I mean, if you're thinking you're stealing them so that you can go and sell them on the black market and make, you know, millions off of them, but there's such famous paintings, and even the lesser famous ones, still some, you would think somebody would recognize them and they not be able to go anywhere. What's the point in stealing them just to hide them away in a basement or an attic?
Well, that's why I think it was a selfish person, because they want them for their own enjoyment. And, you know, and
But you can't even brag about it because that you have these things, because you stole them or they were stolen for
right,
you.
right. Well, you can't brag about it, but you can look at them yourself when you want and how you want. You can, you know, say, aren't I clever that I have own this and have this, but you can't brag about it. That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think there have been other people who have stolen art because they loved the artwork, but other people have stolen art and you can't sell it on the black market, because it would, you know, you can't sell it at auction, you can't sell it to galleries, but there is something called the gray market. And, you know, these are um, horrible people selling to each other, you know, and somehow it's like a layer of the underworld that knows each other. But I mean, that is really, really hard to research because they're very clever. They don't really make themselves known in any way.
Right.
But I think it was stolen for personal pleasure. Um, and I mean, stealing art in various ways just goes way back in time. You know, there are just people who become avaricious, and I have to have that, whatever way I can get it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've learned, we've been doing these events since midsummer of last year. We have over 3 dozen or so that I've done, and we have, of course, the whole month's worth of mystery writers here. One thing that I noticed was every genre has subgenre, which I knew, but of course I stick to kind of what I like. But and I'm sure that I've read some of these subgenres, but not realizing that they are. Case in point is in February we did one called Fantasy Romance February. We actually piggybacked on a local writer who was trying to get out the fantasy romance um, subgenre, and there's subgenres in that as well. And I learned a lot about all those different styles. And so while putting this month together, there are so many different types of mystery books, and we've had mystery writers before. We've had people from Sisters in Crime come in and do panels and stuff, and they have their different subgenres. But one thing that we've gotten requests for in the store are cozies, and I didn't really know what a cozy. I knew what a mystery was, of course. You had the detective, or the FBI agent, or the cop, or whatever. And then so this, though, from now my understanding, having looked at the different authors that we have set up, is you have the FBI, you have the police, but you have this person who has no law enforcement experience, no law experience, justice experience, trying to solve this crime. Would you consider this, under my understanding, would you consider this a cozy?
Not really. But it's a very good question. I think it's a really good question, because she helps the FBI.
Okay.
And she helps Interpol. But when they actually do the sting, and there is a sting, it is Interpol that engineers the sting. And so she's an amateur, obviously, but they were, very taken with her analysis and with her contacts. And I don't want to give too much away, but it really is Interpol that does, they execute the sting. They plan and execute the sting with the art crime guy from the FBI, who is, has brought her with him to Columbia.
So she's more of a consultant.
She's a consultant, exactly.
Okay. So one of my other understandings is in a cozy, it's more on the lighter side,
Right.
not necessarily not serious, but on the lighter side, where this does feel like it's more of a heavier nature. Did you ever think, when going into this book, when you were thinking about writing this and starting to develop the story, about going in that direction versus the direction you went in?
That's a very good question. No, I didn't. I didn't know about cozies when I wrote this. I mean, I suppose when you don't have dead bodies, um, then it's kind of a cozy. You could have amateur detective, but I didn't really know about cozies. I was interested, because of my interest in art, and I look at great art, like, as I mentioned, Delacroix's Liberté, or Velázquez's Las Meninas, or Vermeer's The Concert. I consider those paintings mysteries that, you know, we look at them and we bring interpretations to them. They're mysterious. We don't know who all these characters are and how they connect. So I've always been fascinated with mysteries. And, you know, I think art heists are not like, you know, shoot 'em ups or where you find dead bodies. Although in this case, you're dealing with some really cutthroat people, you know, in the cocaine trade. And there's talk about people dying, but you don't actually see people dying. So, you know, I didn't really know about cozies until after I finished this book. And I like the concept of cozies. You know, I like that, you know, that they're lighthearted and they're fun. I guess Alexander McCall, it would be one writer who writes cozies. But, you know, I like the concept of it, but I don't know. I'm just, I like mysteries. I like mysteries about life and about art and about, I don't know. I don't know if I'm explaining it. Um, but
Yeah, yeah. So did you read a lot of mysteries? Is that
oh,
what draws you to mysteries, or being in the art world and knowing about these heists and stuff? That's kind of what got you into writing about or writing mystery stories.
yes, I've read lots of mysteries. I love Donna Leon's mysteries set in Venice. I love Louise Penny, you know, Inspector Gamish, I think his name is, you know, taking place in this little town up in Canada. You know, I like Henning Mankell, you know, the Swedish guy. Um, you know, I like some of the old mysteries. I love, you know, the Maltese Falcon. Oh gosh, what's his name? He was married, Raymond Chandler. And you know, I love, I think mysteries as a genre is probably my favorite genre. But I would consider people, you know, like Graham Greene, the writer, the British writer, you know, he's not considered a mystery writer, but there's always something deeply mysterious happening in his books.
Mhm.
So,
Do you watch any film, TV mysteries? If you do, what are your favorites? Have you drawn inspiration from them?
well, I mean, definitely, as I said, the Maltese Falcon. I mean, Nick and Nora, um, you know, what a great detective team. Um, you know, I don't watch much television. I have to be honest. It's not my medium. It's my daughter's
Mhm.
medium, but it's not my medium. But I love film. So, you know, I watch a lot of, um, you know, I think one of the recent films that I've seen was the Murder on the Orient Express. I mean,
Mm,
Agatha Christie, you know, I love that movie. I think the suspense is just incredible. And the characters are all so fascinating. They're all so unique. Such a, you know, Agatha Christie knows how to get together um, an iconoclastic room of people.
mhm. What about like Sherlock Holmes?
Oh, I love Sherlock Holmes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The classics are the classic mystery writers are very appealing to me. You know, I also like Scott Turow. I think he's very brainy. You know, his lawyer um, mysteries are very, very fascinating.
Mhm.
whenever something bad happens, you have a mystery, you have to solve it, right?
Yep. Yeah. So let's talk about your writing process. Um, you're ready to write your next novel, or even writing this one here. Did you have a certain time of day that you did that? Did you have a certain ritual that you would go through before, or is it just sort of whenever you felt like sitting or had time to sit down?
Thank you for that question. Okay. Yeah, I am working on a sequel to this. It's about it definitely involves stolen art, but in actual fact, it's about Nazi stolen art. And Portia leaves her gallery, and Julian Henderson, the FBI art crime team person, leaves the FBI, and they become a PI team together. And they're working for a Cambridge family, Cambridge, Massachusetts family, to find the patrimony that belonged to the great grandfather that was stolen by the Nazis. So they go to Germany, and they're looking for the art. But what inspired that is that I had the privilege of meeting some really extraordinary German people from Tübingen University who were doing research on the Holocaust and wanted to do good things to make up for the evil deeds that their parents had done. So I think the theme of good and evil, or light and dark, as I have it in, A Discerning Eye, I mean, they're big themes, but those are the themes about life. And that's what really, really attracts me, really concerns me. So my process of writing is revision, revision, revision. I think, this book, A Discerning Eye, I think I must have done like 20, at least 20 revisions of it. It's hard to write. It's hard to write a novel, and it's hard to tell, a complex story and have all kinds of different characters, and to make it real, even though it's fiction, to make it seem real because you've done the research. And the research actually, comes to me naturally. And that's the easy part. The hard part is revising. And, I write almost every day. I wouldn't say every day, but almost every day. And, I try not to think about how good it is. I just get it out there. And, after I've done, maybe 5 or 6 chapters, then I'll go back to the beginning and look at it with, a different eye. And then I'm in a writing group, which I've been in with some writers in New York. Even though I'm not located there, I call in, and we meet every month and we critique each other's work. But yeah, writing is revision, revision, revision.
So actually, I'm going to ask that later. So when I started doing all these interviews, there's two words that always kept coming up until I finally asked, well, I finally figured out what they were and asked what they were. Are you a plotter or a pantser?
Oh, that's a very good question. No, I definitely am a plotter. I have an outline. I begin with an outline, but it's a live outline. I keep changing it as I go along, but I have an outline. Otherwise, I couldn't do it.
So when you're done, you've got everything set, you've done your revisions, you've done your own self-editing. Do you go on to beta readers to read? Do you use specific beta readers for specific like technical aspects, like the FBI aspect, or maybe a firearms aspect, or do you just sort of just take general things, or do you or use a professional editor?
I think all of the above. So in my writing group, one of the members, actually the leader of our writing group, worked at the Metropolitan Museum. He worked in their archives department. And so he was, technically speaking, a very good critic in terms of that. And then, I have met ex-CIA, ex-FBI people, and I have had them look at the manuscript and said, is this real? Does this make sense? I mean, I've done a lot of research on the internet, but I've tested out with people who've had these kinds of jobs, and to make sure that it's authentic. And then, I have had beta readers, but ultimately I've hired, a professional editor, because I think in today's world, I mean, Hemingway never had to do any of this, right? Or Fitzgerald, and they certainly, didn't get MFAs. But in today's world, I just think you really need to have a professional editor as the, ultimate test. Is this really going to appeal to readers? Is this a page turner? And I think you have to do that.
Mhm.
I think it maybe because many more books are published. I think someone once told me that Hemingway sold like 35,000 copies of one of his novels. And in today's world, that would be nothing, right?
No.
So, I mean, the world has changed, especially because of the internet, especially, I won't mention, the issue, because I'm a very, very strong supporter of independent bookstores.
Well, thank you.
I worked in one in New York, and I loved it. I thought, being, your job, being in touch with people who come into the bookstore, who are avid readers, and they ask your advice, and it's such a wonderful experience. It's really, really wonderful. So nothing, in my humble opinion, can replace that.
I do appreciate that. So I didn't, and I forgot to look, and I was going to look, but did you self-publish this, or did you go through a traditional publisher, and why? Which one and why?
I worked with a small publisher called Kevin Bridge Press, and I will admit that I know the person who is the head of Kevin Bridge Press. And I went that route because I had a very unfortunate experience with the big five. I had a VP of one of the big publishers who wanted to publish my novel, and she lost her job, and so I just couldn't bring myself to, I was so appalled. It was a political kind of thing, and I couldn't, so I worked with this small press, and that's the way it is. I should tell you that after I worked in London on art books, I came back to the US and I was an editorial assistant at Random House when it was a great publishing house. And, they published poetry, W.H. Auden, and, they published, just William
Mhm.
Styron, who at that time was my favorite writer. And, that was the time when publishing really was a wonderful kind of profession. It's now become big business. And with the conglomeration of, now there are four. There used to be five. Now there are four um, publishers. And, the whole thing is, the bottom line, is it going to sell? Is it going to sell? And, you know, I remember at Random House, it was the belief in this author. This author is someone worth investing in over time. And so it's the smaller publishers that are now providing that kind of uh, representation.
Yeah, I totally agree. We work with or we pull from a lot of small presses. Um, local authors, they use the smaller presses and stuff, and they're putting out wonderful products. So you mentioned a writers group in New York. What are some? Actually, before we went live, you also mentioned Sisters in Crime, and I do want to put a plug out to Sisters in Crime
Oh,
because
Sisters in
they're,
Crime is
um,
wonderful.
they got us, work with us for some of their panels, and we're going to have a few more virtually this year. But we actually did the virtual ones last year too, and they were a big hit. Um, and getting us in touch with you wonderful writers too. So they've been fantastic, and I know Leslie is here tonight with
Yes,
us on Zoom, and we will be speaking with Leslie in person. I think
yes.
next week. So what other groups? How important are writers groups and peer groups and groups like Sisters in Crime?
Well, the writers group I belong to was at the New York Society Library, which is the oldest private library in the US. And they, are so supportive of authors. And there are some really, really famous authors that are members, but they're supportive of all writers. So I'm in that writing group. And I feel very fortunate because I'm not present, but I call in. Sisters in Crime is really an amazing organization. I didn't mention Sarah Paretsky, who is the founder of it, who is just wonderful, and probably the first American writer to have such a strong female protagonist. But Leslie and the Sisters in Crime group in New England is really special. And they come up with all kinds of ways for writers to participate, and they provide a sense of community, and they have clam bake. And they just come up with endless ways for members to be supportive of each other. And the other thing that I think is really impressive, it's called Sisters in Crime, but I think in recent years, they've accepted men. So there are misters in crime as well as sisters, but it's such a lovely, supportive group. And, I am just thrilled to be a part of it. And I'm going to be present when Leslie, next
Great,
week, I'm going to be there.
great. So obviously over the past year, everything has to be done virtually. Did you do in-person meetings with groups? And I'm willing to bet you're looking forward to doing that again, or have everything been done sort of long distance?
Yeah, well, nothing like launching a novel during a pandemic. I have not done one in-person event. It's really sad to say, I'm hoping that there will be an in-person event in the fall. But so far, it's all been virtual. I did a big event. I got my MBA at Simmons University in Boston, and they were kind enough to do a really big event for me with all of their alumni. And but it's virtual. It's a virtual world still, but I look forward to in person. In person is so much. I mean, it's great that you can Zoom with people from far away, but there's nothing like, being able to talk with people before an event and after an event, right?
Well, and definitely it's an opportunity, at least, for to sell your book
Mhm.
and sell your books as well. Yeah, we're hoping to have in person. We actually did have an in-person event today, our first one in 14 or 15 months. It was pretty exciting. It was outdoors. We had a roped off area, 6 feet on all sides, one person in, one person out. So it worked well. So we're hoping to get, we're looking for midsummer, maybe end of summer, but definitely, you will be, along with a lot of others, on our list to have in person. We have our gallery. Hopefully we can get that open. We can have a
Oh, that's
multi-author.
wonderful.
We had one multi-author event, second weekend in March, and then 3 days later we closed down. So we'll definitely do that again. So we'll have a few minutes left, but I do like to ask this question, kind of fun. So, a discerning eye, if you could have anybody, let me ask this: is it in audiobook form, or is it
Yeah,
something that it is?
no, it is audiobook.
Okay.
And Campbell Scott, the actor Campbell Scott, and his wife, Kathleen McElfresh, did the audiobook.
Oh, great, great.
Yeah.
Because so that was good. One of my questions is if you could have any. And now, was this somebody you chose, or was it somebody that your publisher chose for you, or?
Well, this is another advantage of working with a small publisher. She suggested an audiobook, and I am lucky. I happen to have known Campbell personally, and so I dealt with his agent. But I said I want to do it with Campbell because he is not only a marvelous actor, he's a really fabulous person. And both he and his wife are really talented people and care about the world. They have values.
So if you could have this book then turned into a major motion feature, who would play? Who would you love to have play Portia?
Oh, okay. I can tell you, Jennifer Lawrence.
Okay, all right. What about some of the other characters? Who would you like to see as a rounded cast?
Oh my gosh. Well, she's the only one I've really thought about, but I love your question. I'll have to give it more thought.
There you go. There you go.
Thank you, Chris.
So you mentioned that you have this next book or a sequel to A Discerning Eye. Is it going to be a standalone, or do they have to read the first one first, so as a continuation of the first book?
No, I think they won't have to read the first one first. References will be made back to A Discerning Eye, but it's a sequel because the characters will continue, but they're both standalones.
Is
Also.
there a timeline for publication?
I'm looking at, another, hopefully I'll have a final manuscript in another 6 months.
Okay, all right. Well, you'll definitely have to let us know
I will, Chris.
when it's coming out, and we'll definitely get it out for pre-sale. We're hoping to get A Discerning Eye in the bookstore very soon. It's on the ever-growing list of who we need to get, but
Thank you.
budget dictates, what we can do when we can do it. But For right now, though, your book is available on bookshop.org. Again, you could always call us to order it, and we can go straight to the publisher and get it. I hope to hear that A Discerning Eye audiobook is, if it isn't already, that hopefully sometime it'll be on Libro.fm. That is the audiobook company that we work with, we partner with. We have a link to them. Anything purchased through them, we get a portion of. So something to look forward to, because we will definitely promote the heck out of it if that's ever on there. You'll have to let me know
Yeah.
if
What
it
is
is.
the name of the audiobook company?
Libro.fm.
Libro. Okay. Okay, I will look into that because it's been reviewed in the Library Journal. The audiobook just been reviewed this
Great.
month. So, okay.
Yeah,
Well,
so we'll look forward to that. So again, yeah, bookshop.org, give me a call. You can probably definitely go to, do you have a website where they can get the book as well?
a website, I'm
hmm
sorry.
Do you have a website? Can they get the book directly from you as well?
No,
Or
no, I
no?
only work for bookstores.
Okay, well, great. So either us, bookshop.org, or definitely your local bookstore, wherever you happen to wherever you may happen to be. So Carol, thank you very much. It was a pleasure meeting you. It was a pleasure talking to you. Definitely let us know when the second book comes out, and we'll definitely keep you on our list to have in store as soon as we can do that.
Chris, thank you so much for the opportunity of this interview, and I really appreciate it. It was a pleasure to meet you,
Oh,
and I
thank
hope
you.
to get up to Dover.
Yes, definitely. There's always an open door invitation for you to stop in and say
Okay,
hi. Thank you
all right.
everybody here. Thank you everybody on Facebook Live for watching.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.